Chapter 1. The First Parcel. If you had asked anyone in the quiet village of Blackthorn what they thought of Mr. Harold Kent, most would have answered with a vague shrug. A decent enough man, Mrs. Baxter at the post office would say. Unremarkable, the vicar's wife might add. Pays his bills on time, old Mr. Parsons at the grocer's would admit, which in his eyes was the highest praise of all. Harold Kent lived alone at Blackthorn House, a narrow brick place at the edge of the village, half swallowed by a row of neglected yew trees. He was 53, mild in manner and moderate in speech. He took solitary walks at set hours, drank his tea at precisely 4 o'clock, and had never, so far as anyone knew, rode with a neighbor, been drunk, or done anything whatsoever that might be called interesting. That is why, when the first parcel came, it felt like a tiny stone dropped into a very still pond. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, wrapped in brown paper and tied with ordinary string. Mrs. Baxter noted, as she always did, the paid postage and the neatness of the address. Mr. Harold Kent, Blackthorn House, Blackthorn, no sender, no return address, nothing to hint at origin. Harold signed for it absently, thinking of the translation work that awaited him in his study. Only when he reached the safety of his own hallway did he realize his hands were trembling ever so slightly. It was absurd, he told himself. People receive parcels every day. Books, catalogs, household goods. There was nothing sinister about brown paper and string. And yet, he took the letter opener from the hall table and slit the paper with a practiced hand. Inside lay a cheap cardboard box, lined with crumpled newspaper. In the box were a folded sheet of white paper and something metallic that caught the light. Harold picked up the note first. The letters were uneven, jagged, and coldly impersonal. They had been cut from headlines and advertisements in different newspapers, then pasted together to form words. We know your secret. You will not escape it. This is only the first warning. For a moment, the hallway seemed to tilt around him. It was not the message itself that struck fear into Harold Kent's heart. Threats, he knew, were often idle. No, it was the pronoun. We, not I, but we, a chorus of unseen judges. His gaze dropped to the object at the bottom of the box. It was a key, the sort any locksmith might provide, but someone had carefully painted it with bright red nail polish. It lay there, gleaming like a drop of frozen blood. Harold sank into a chair. The key pressed in his palm, cold and very real. They can't know, he whispered. They cannot possibly know. But already, in the quiet corner of his mind where he rarely dared to look, an old memory was stirring, stretching, unfurling, opening its eyes. Chapter 2. The Belgian Visitor. 3 days later, a stranger arrived in Blackthorn. He was a small man, impeccably dressed, with a silver-topped walking stick he did not seem to need. His dark hair was slicked back with meticulous care, and his mustache, his mustache was groomed into a precise little arc above his upper lip. He introduced himself at the Grey Fox Inn as Monsieur Etienne Morel, a Belgian detective. I am here on a private matter, he told Mrs. Jarvis, the landlady, in accented but precise English. I shall stay a few days only, a week at the most. By lunchtime, the entire village knew there was some sort of foreign detective staying at the inn. By tea time, Monsieur Morel had presented himself at the front door of Blackthorn House. Harold opened the door in his shirt sleeves, looking older than his years and altogether more tired than a man ought to look at for in the afternoon. Yes, he asked. Mr. Harold Kent, the stranger inquired. Permit me to introduce myself. My name is Etienne Morel. I come at the request of your niece, Miss Alice Kent. Alice. Harold blinked. She has sent you? Indeed. Morel dipped his head. She is concerned for you, Monsieur Kent. She believes you may need professional assistance. Professional assistance? Regarding certain letters, Morel said softly. Parcels. Messages which arrive with no name attached, but with much malice. For a moment, Harold seemed about to deny everything. Then he stepped aside. Very well, he said. You had better come in. They sat in Harold's book-lined study, the curtains drawn against the fading autumn light. On the desk between them lay the brown paper, the cardboard box, the note with its ugly newspaper letters, and the red-painted key. "You received this on Tuesday?" Morel asked. "Yes, in the morning." Harold clasped his hands together to keep them from shaking. "At first I thought it a childish prank. But the wording, the key—" He trailed off. "You believe this secret refers to something real," Morel said gently. "Something you have done that another might wish to expose?" Harold's eyes moved to the fire. The flames there did not burn high. They glowed with a steady, domestic heat. His voice, when he spoke, was thin. 26 years ago, he began, "I taught at a small private school on the coast. St. Bartholomew's. I was young, ambitious, eager to impress. There was a boy, Philip Darnell, clever, quiet, from a wealthy family. He struggled socially. The other boys teased him. There was an incident, a cruel prank, and afterwards—" "Afterwards?" Morel prompted. "Afterwards, Philip disappeared," Harold said. "One night, he simply ran away. There was a search, of course. Police questions, rumors. The school wanted the scandal to die quickly. His parents were influential. And he swallowed. I was the master on duty that night," he whispered. "I should have seen, should have intervened. But I did nothing. By the time I realized he was gone, it was too late. They never found him. It was assumed he had drowned. The cliffs are treacherous," he was distraught. "His parents blamed everyone. I resigned at the end of term. Changed jobs. Came here. I have been hiding ever since." Morel watched the shame settle on him like dust. "So," he said quietly, "we have a tragedy long ago. A missing boy, presumed dead. A teacher who carries the weight of that night on his conscience. And now, 26 years later, a letter appears. We know your secret. You think it is connected?" "In my experience," Morel replied, "there is no coincidence in matters of fear. When a man receives a threat that touches his deepest guilt, it is rarely chosen at random. Tell me, who besides yourself knows the full story?" "Very few," Harold said. "Alice. I told her when her parents died, and she came to live with me. The headmaster, he is dead now. The Darnells, if they are still alive. Some of the boys. Some of the other masters. And any of those boys might now be men with long memories," Morel murmured. "Men with grievances. Men with imaginations." As if to prove his words, the bell rang the next morning, and Mrs. Baxter delivered a second parcel. Chapter 3. Tokens of the Past. The second parcel was smaller, but more carefully wrapped. Again, there was no return address. Again, the handwriting on the label was block capitals, neat but oddly slanting. Morel stood by while Harold opened it at the kitchen table. Inside, they found another cheap box, another folded paper, and another object. The new message, built from a collage of newspaper scraps, read, "You let him fall. You let him drown. His blood is on your hands." At the bottom, someone had pasted a tiny silhouette of a boy cut from a clothing advertisement. The object beneath the note was a small plastic sailor, the kind once found in children's bath toys. Its head had been snapped off. Harold recoiled. "This is monstrous." "Not monstrous," Morel said, turning the little figure thoughtfully between his fingers. "Theatrical. Our sender is staging a drama for your benefit, Monsieur Kent. Symbolism, repetition, escalation. He wishes to torment, not to inform." "But how does he know?" Harold cried. "How can anyone know so much about that night?" "Because he was there," Morel said simply, "either as Philip Darnell, or as someone who loved him, or as someone who hated him. To find which it is, we must examine your present as well as your past." That day and the next, Morel conducted what he called his little survey. He chatted with Mrs. Baxter at the post office, with Mr. Daly the postman, with Mrs. Jarvis at the Grey Fox, with the Reverend Miles Harbury at the vicarage. Outwardly, it was all pleasantries, yet his sharp eyes missed nothing. From Mrs. Baxter, he learned that the parcels had been posted in London. From Mr. Daly, he received wounded assurances that he merely delivered what was given him. From Mrs. Jarvis, he heard of a guest who interested him. "A Mr. Leonard Norton," she said, leaning over the bar. "Came down from London last week. Keeps odd hours. Knows Mr. Kent from somewhere, he says, but you won't get more than that out of him. And he prints his name in my ledger instead of writing it like a normal person. That's not natural, if you ask me. From the vicar, Morrel took tea in a neat sitting room that smelled faintly of polish and sermon paper. Mr. Kent, the Reverend Harbury said, a troubled man, I think. Very conscientious. Very alone. He comes to church only rarely, but when he does, he listens as if each word were a verdict. Has he enemies? Morrel asked. The Lord knows of none, Harbury replied with a shy smile. Nor do I. Blackthorn is a quiet parish. Morrel thanked him and left, his mind busier than his manner suggested. On Sunday morning the third parcel arrived. This time there was no box inside, only an envelope and a photograph. The photograph showed a group of boys in school uniforms, standing on a lawn before a gray building. Across the middle someone had drawn a shaky red circle around one of the boys, narrow-shouldered, solemn-eyed Philip Darnell. At the end of the back row stood a younger Harold Kent, arms folded, expression anxiously stern. Harold's breath caught. That's my old form at St. Bartholomew's. I haven't seen this in years. The note? Morrel asked. Harold opened the envelope with clumsy fingers. The pasted words read, You remember him. We remember you. Soon everyone will know. Below the text was another silhouette of the circled boy, this time with a jagged tear where the head should be. I can't bear this, Harold whispered. It's inhuman. It is self-indulgent, Morrel corrected. Our playwright becomes bolder. He has produced a prop from your school days. That photograph did not come from you. It came from school archives or from the Darnell family. Therefore, our sender has had access to one of those places. He made a telephone call to St. Bartholomew's that afternoon. The elderly assistant secretary who answered was only too happy to reminisce. Yes, we still have old photographs, she said. And yes, Philip Darnell, dreadful business. His parents took copies of everything when they left. Switzerland, I believe. We've heard nothing of them since. Oh, and I see in the old staff list that a young curate named Miles Harbury served as school chaplain the following year. Funny, that name sounds familiar. Morrel thanked her and hung up very gently indeed. Chapter 4. The Man in the Study. The next disturbance came not by post, but by night. On Tuesday, at 17 minutes past 2 in the morning, Harold Kent woke to the unmistakable sound of someone moving downstairs. The house creaked in storms and sighed in wind, but this was different. A stealthy tread, a faint rattle of a drawer. He lay rigid, heart pounding, then swung his legs out of bed and pulled on his dressing gown. Common sense told him to telephone the police, or at least to ring the Gray Fox and ask for Morrel, but shame at the thought of his own fear drove him to the landing alone. A thin line of light shone beneath the study door. It wavered, as if the hand guiding the torch were moving. Harold grasped the doorknob, counted to 3 under his breath, and flung the door open. A figure stood at his desk, tall and dark against the lamplight. For a stunned moment, all Harold saw was the outline. A man in a dark coat, one hand at his desk drawer, the other holding a small electric torch. "Who are you?" Harold cried. "What do you want?" The man spun round. The beam of the torch hit Harold full in the face, blinding him. When his vision cleared a second later, the intruder was at the window, the sash thrown up, cool night air rushing in. By the time Harold reached it, he saw only a shape moving swiftly along the garden path and into the shadow of the yews. Morrel arrived 20 minutes later, summoned at last by a shaking telephone call. "You should not have gone down alone," he said mildly, bending to examine the desk. "A frightened man is a poor match for an angry one." "He was looking through my drawers," Harold said hoarsely. "My private papers. The letters. Nothing appears to be missing." Morrel found, near the leg of the desk, a scrap of paper no larger than a thumbnail. On it was part of a printed capital letter in the same font as the ransom-style notes. "So," he murmured, "our correspondent is careless in the dark. That is useful. You think it was Norton?" Harold asked. "Possibly," Morrel said. "He arrived from London just before the first parcel. He prints his name in my hostess's ledger. He has reason to resent your success. All this, however, is circumstantial. I prefer something more substantial before I accuse." That evening at the inn, he bought Norton a whiskey. "You knew Mr. Kent at St. Bartholomew's," Morrel said conversationally. Norton grimaced. He was my housemaster. Strict, but not cruel. The ones we hated are long retired or dead. And Philip Darnell? Norton's jaw tightened. Awkward little chap. The sort bullies sniff out. I wasn't kind, I'll admit it. None of us were. Then one night he was gone, and suddenly it was all our fault, especially Kent's. Darnell's father tried to have the whole place torn down in the papers. You came to Blackthorn because I lost my job, Norton said bluntly. Sales. Targets. The usual. Saw Harold's name in an address book. Thought perhaps he might introduce me to someone. I'm not proud of it. But I didn't send those letters, if that's what you're dancing around. I may have many faults, Monsieur Morel, but arts and crafts is not one of them. Morel smiled. I never dance. I merely take small, precise steps. Chapter 5. Alice and the Vicar. Alice Kent returned from Oxford the following afternoon. She was 30, brisk and clear-eyed, with the resolute air of someone used to having to sort out other people's lives. My uncle is not a bad man, she told Morel at the end, but he is very, very good at punishing himself. He has been doing it for decades. You believe these threats refer to Philip Darnell? Morel asked. Of course. What else is there? It's the only scandal he was ever near. When I was 18, he told me the whole story. I think he needed at least one person in the world to know what he thought he'd done. Where were you when the first parcel arrived? In Oxford, Alice said at once. At a conference on modern poetry. You can ring the faculty and ask. They'll confirm my registration and lectures. I came home the moment Mrs. Baxter telephoned about anonymous packages. Morel inclined his head. Her alibi, he thought, would be inconveniently easy to check. That evening he paid another call on the vicar. The Reverend Harbury invited him into the lamplit study and pushed aside a stack of hymn sheets to make room for the Belgian's hat. You must find our little village very dull, Harbury said apologetically. We are not troubled with many crimes. Dullness, Morel replied, is often an illusion. Underneath the quiet surface of a pond, there may be a great many pike and eels. Harbury laughed. You make us sound terrifying. I've been speaking with the archives at St. Bartholomew's, Morel said. You were there once, were you not? Harbury's hand, reaching for the teapot, paused almost imperceptibly. Yes, he said, for a year, as school chaplain. It was after the Darnell boy disappeared. A difficult post, in many ways. But that was a lifetime ago. You remember Mr. Kent? I do, Harbury said slowly. A conscientious young master. Hard on himself. Harder, I think, than anyone else was. Why do you ask? Because someone with knowledge of those events is tormenting him now, Morel said. And that's someone like symbols, keys, toys, old photographs. Ecclesiastical work often involves symbols too, does it not? Harbury smiled faintly. You suspect me of sending anonymous letters, Monsieur Morel? I suspect everybody, Morel said cheerfully. It saves time later. When he left the vicarage, he did not walk back to the inn at once. Instead, he strolled around the church, noting the neatness of the notice board. The weekly announcements were printed there in carefully formed block capitals. The slant of those letters, the pressure of the pen, the spacing, all were very familiar. The hand that writes for God by day, he murmured, may cut from newspapers by night. Chapter 6, Setting the Trap. That night at Blackthorn House, Morel laid his plan. Harold, pale and exhausted, agreed reluctantly to play his part. Alice, though anxious, proved steady. Your tormentor wishes to force you into the open, Morel explained. He wants you to confess, to suffer publicly, perhaps even to destroy yourself. We will turn this desire against him. How? Harold asked. By offering him exactly what he wants on our terms. The next morning, Harold walked, very visibly, to the post office and sent a registered letter addressed to a firm of solicitors in London. Mrs. Baxter, of course, made a mental note. The letter contained. Morel watched him go straight to the study, as if he knew every inch of the house. Light flared as the desk lamp snapped on. Paper rustled. A drawer slid open. Morel waited, counting slowly to 30, then stepped to the doorway. Good evening, Reverend Harbury, he said. Looking for something? The vicar wheeled round. For a moment, all the color left his face. then came flooding back in 2 burning patches. "Monsieur Morel," he stammered. I saw the door open. I thought perhaps Mr. Kent was unwell. I heard." "You heard," Morel said evenly, "that Mr. Kent intended to confess to the police, and you could not allow that. Not yet. Not before you were ready." He moved into the room, between Harbury and the window. "It is a mistake, you know, to return to the scene of one's own drama too often. Sooner or later the curtain falls." On the desk, beneath Harbury's trembling hand, lay a sheet of paper. It was blank, save for the first few pasted letters he had been about to arrange. "You came to add another act to your little play," Morel went on. "Perhaps a final ultimatum, perhaps something more. But you did not come as a concerned clergyman, reverend. You came as Philip Darnell." Silence crashed down. Harbury stared at him, lips parted. At last he whispered, "You know, I have suspected," Morel said, "since I saw the school records. Philip Miles Darnell. Miles. Later, Miles Harbury. A change of name is simple enough when one has been through foster homes, orphanages, theological colleges. And yet the face remains, does it not?" He tapped the old photograph on the desk. "The bones of the boy become the bones of the man, but they're the same bones." Harbury sank into Harold's chair. His shoulders folded, and suddenly he seemed very young. "I didn't drown," he said dully. "Obviously. I climbed the cliff path in the dark. I wanted them to think I was dead. I wanted them to feel what it was like to lose something they loved. Father, mother, the whole school. Kent most of all. Because he did nothing," Morel said gently. "Because he watched," Harbury snapped. "He watched them torment me and pretended not to see. He told himself it was harmless. Boys will be boys. Then, when I ran, he suddenly discovered his conscience. He got to live with his guilt, but I had to live with everything else. New homes, new names, therapy, nights waking up choking on seawater that wasn't there." "And yet," Morel observed, "you did not choose a life of crime. You chose the clergy. You chose to comfort others." Harbury gave a small, bitter laugh. "You think that wasn't part of it? Being the kindly vicar, living in the same village as my old housemaster, waiting to see if he'd recognize me? He never did. I thought eventually the irony might be enough. But it wasn't. Now when I saw how peacefully he lived. So I began the letters. The parcels were posted in London," Morel said. "You went there for diocesan meetings, or so you told your parishioners." Harbury nodded. "It was easy, too easy. Mrs. Baxter loves a mystery. She spread the gossip for me. I only meant to frighten him at first. Remind him. Make him feel watched. And to break in tonight?" Harbury looked at his hands. "I heard about the letter to the solicitors. I thought he really meant to go to the police. If he told the whole story, people would pity him. Poor Mr. Kent, haunted by his one mistake. I couldn't bear it. I wanted him to confess to me, not to them. To look me in the eyes and admit what he'd done." He lifted his gaze suddenly. "I never meant to hurt him. Truly." From the doorway came a small sound, a whisper of breath. Harold Kent stood there, Alice behind him. They had returned from inn quietly on Morel's instructions, in time to hear the last few sentences. "Philip," Harold said hoarsely. "Good God, Philip." Harbury rose, every trace of the mild country vicar stripped away. What remained was the gaunt, furious boy from the photograph, grown taller, but not gentler. "You remember me at last," he said. Harold took a step into the room as if drawn by a rope. "I thought you were dead." "I imagined you did," Harbury said. "It made everything simpler for you." "I have thought of you every day for 26 years, Harold said. "You may not believe that, but it is true. I saw you on that lawn with the others. I saw them torment you, and I told myself it would toughen you, teach you to fit in, and then you were gone, and I knew exactly what I had done. Or rather, what I had not done." The two men faced each other, one burning with long-nursed hatred, the other with belated courage. Alice stood very still, her hand clenched on the back of a chair. Morel watched them both with that particular alert stillness that meant he would intervene in a heartbeat if necessary. "I wanted justice," Harbury said. "If the police heard the full story, they would say," Morel interrupted quietly, "that a boy ran away from school during a time of bullying and was presumed drowned. They would take statements, nod gravely, perhaps open an inquiry into old safeguarding procedures, then close it again. At most, Monsieur Kent would suffer a few unpleasant headlines. You, Reverend, would be exposed as having faked your death and harassed a man for years. You would lose your vocation, your parish, all that you have built from your pain. And he walks free? Harbury demanded. I have never been free, Harold said. You're not the only one who wakes choking on memories. I left the school, but it never left me. There was a silence then, long and taut. You came here, Morrel said softly to Harbury, and chose to live near him. That was not the choice of a man who wishes only revenge. That is the choice of a man who cannot decide whether he hates or needs the person he blames. Confession, forgiveness, these are your trade, are they not, Reverend? Perhaps it is time you practiced them on yourself. Harbury looked from Morrel to Harold and back again. His shoulders sagged. What will you do with me? He asked. That, Morrel said, is for Monsieur Kent to decide. You have committed crimes, yes, harassment, breaking and entering. The law could punish you. But I suspect no punishment it can devise will equal what you have done to yourself in your own mind. Harold spoke slowly, as if testing each word before he released it. If you wish to go to the police, he said to Harbury, I will go with you. I will tell them exactly how I failed you. I will say your anger is justified, but it will not bring back your childhood, Philip, and it will not drown mine again. Harbury's eyes filled with a sudden, shocking wetness. He sat down abruptly, as though his knees would no longer hold him. I don't know how to stop being angry, he whispered. Then perhaps, Alice said quietly for the first time, you might start by not sending any more parcels. Chapter 7, a different ending. In the end, there was no dramatic trial. No ludid headlines. Morrel's prediction proved accurate. After long conversations, some bitter, some merely weary, Harold and Philip agreed on a compromise. Harold wrote a full account of the events at St. Bartholomew's, sparing himself nothing. He gave a copy to Philip, another to Alice, and a third to the diocesan bishop, who decided that the Reverend Harbury's past, while tragic and irregular, did not in itself disqualify him from his ministry, provided he sought counseling and ceased his vengeful campaign at once. The parcel stopped. Mrs. Baxter was disappointed. The disappearance of the mystery robbed the post office of its brief excitement. Norton left the village, having grudgingly found work in a nearby town through a contact of Alice's. Mrs. Jarvis retained the story of the Belgian detective for the rest of her social life. As for Harold Kent, he was not magically healed. Guilt rooted deep does not vanish overnight. But he began, slowly, to live a little less like a man in hiding. Sometimes he even walked down to the church and listened to the sermons of the vicar who had once been his pupil. Their conversations afterwards were awkward, then less awkward, then, on rare days, almost peaceful. On the morning Morrel departed, Alice walked with him to the station. You saved my uncle, she said, and perhaps the vicar as well. I merely held up a mirror, Morrel replied. They did the rest. You knew very early, didn't you, that Miles Harbury and Philip Darnell were the same person? I suspected, Morrel said. A boy presumed drowned whose body was never found. A chaplain whose middle name matched the boy's. A vicar who arrived years later in the very village where his former master lived. A notice board written in the same hand as anonymous threats. It was not a difficult puzzle. The only question was how far his anger would drive him, and if he had come to hurt Uncle Harold, not just frighten him. Alice asked. Then, Morrel said with a small, wintry smile, I should have been in the study 5 minutes earlier. The train pulled in with a gust of steam. Morrel stepped aboard, lifted his hat, and was gone. Blackthorn returned, outwardly, to its ordinary quiet. But in 2 neighboring houses, a narrow brick one by the yews and a stone vicarage by the green, the past no longer pressed quite so heavily on the present. And in some far-off drawer, the red-painted key lay forgotten among old papers, its little drama concluded, its mystery solved.